Hello and welcome to another episode of Talk'n TRM, the podcast dedicated to travel risk management. And I always get really excited when I get to talk to a girl in this space because there's not very many of us. I don't want to call that out straight away, but there's just not many of us. So this is going to be a really, really great episode. This particular person has only just come into my life. However, is going to be in my life a lot more. We've got some exciting ventures planned, which you guys should be hearing all about if you're following us on LinkedIn and our other spaces. But I'm just really delighted to have her here. As soon as I started learning about not just what she does, but sort of some of the reasons behind it, I was just like, before we do anything else, we need to get you on as a guest for the podcast. So I'm really happy to have you here. I will not go on any further, but I will now pass over to yourself and I will say, who are you and what is it that you do?
Thank you very much, Bex. So I'm Alexandra Hoffmann, and I am French, based in France. It hasn't always been the case. I've lived in many places in previous years, and I've traveled the world, which I think is a good introduction to travel security, right? I did that for personal reasons first, because I studied abroad, and then I started my first job in security when just after 9/11. I was in New York and I started working as a security trainee first, and then moved up the ladder ever since. And I was with Avon Products Incorporation. And then after that, I started working for other large organizations. And because that job in security and crisis management, it's, we need to be on site a lot. And I think it was, even if it's reduced a little bit now, I think before it was nonstop traveling in planes, in hotels. I remember with some of our colleagues, when I was with one of those large organizations, we used to stay in touch on Facebook and taking pictures of ourselves in lounges, hotel lounges, airport lounges, saying, "Oh, I'm here, I'm there." I'm like all the time traveling, right? So I've been a security person for 25 years and dealing with preparing and responding and recovering from all kinds of incidents, which led me to set up my own company 5 years ago around everything resilience, which is now called Crisis Ally. That's the name of my company. And what we do is we help crisis leaders and crisis teams thrive through crisis, make sure that they get out of crisis stronger. Really, that's our focus, because I've been in those shoes before, and I know it can be extremely difficult to prepare, respond, and recover day in and day out, especially in today's environment. So that's what we do today. And I'm really happy to connect one of those bridges with the travel security industry, because obviously when we talk about crisis management, security, business continuity, whatever, or risk management, all those topics, obviously travel security is a big one of those topics. It's one of those bridges, which is really important to match with the rest. And that's also actually I would say the one of my mantras with my company. It's really about building bridges and cut those silos. Not that those silos are not necessary or from time to time, but the idea is really to connect people and make sure that they work together in the right direction, in the same direction, right?
Oh my goodness. Anyone listening right now is just going, well, there's why she's on the call podcast. Did she just say bust silos? Did she say get people out and get them doing stuff? There's so much stuff just to kind of touch on there, to kind of talk about how you kind of got to where you got to now. And obviously I've just met you as obviously part of Crisis Ally, and I'm so excited about what you're doing. So I'm just going to talk about that really briefly, because one of the sort of, I guess, bugbears or one of the things I've been experiencing as I've kind of got into this space and I'm talking to corporates about putting frameworks in, thinking about their resilience, but bringing the travel risk piece into it, is this kind of idea that travel it's just not really thought about. It's just a sort of byproduct of other stuff that we have to do, and we're not considering that as the risk itself. Whereas actually, with any kind of incident, whether the travel part is part of it or not, the infrastructure of how people move around is going to have an integral part of how that incident plays out one way or another. So they're completely bound with each other.
Mhm.
Yet people just don't seem to kind of understand that. And then the sort of next stage of it is, well, we'll just put it in a policy then, and then that'll be sorted. Which again is just not how humans work, right? We're not going to do that. And I think one of the first conversations we had, you said, I mean, I've used this a lot, but I've paraphrased it because you were a lot more polite when when you said it to me. But
Tell me, what did I say?
how I paraphrase it is, when the shit hits the fan,
Yeah.
we're going to be sitting in a room with a piece of paper going, oh my God, what do we do? So how do we prevent that from happening and make that stage a lot easier? Because actually you've got a book and you know what to do and you can actually start working things out. But then it's about experiencing this stuff. And I think that's what I
Mm.
love about what you're doing at Crisis Ally, and obviously Ally. And that's what we are hoping to obviously explore with the event that we're working on in March, to kind of bring this stuff to life and to say that this is not about a process or a policy. It's about training your staff. It's about putting them in situations and getting them to think about how they do this stuff. So where did that come from? Where was your sort of thought on that? Why did you decide to set up Crisis Ally?
It was in my head for it had been in my head for many, many years, to be honest with you, Bex. It's like any of those big projects. Sometimes it takes time um, to put it out there, basically. Um, I think I always put this major event or year that happened for me in my professional life around, I would say, 2011, 2012, where I had, when I say I, don't get me wrong, I was always part of a team, right? It was never myself and me, myself, and I, right? But I ended up responding to lots of crises and major ones. Okay. And that's when it dawned on me that even though we were dealing with those events really well, I thought we were missing something. And that's why I really nurtured that thought for years and years, and read and spoke, asked questions and spoke to people. I even got certified as a coach to start learning more about the human being, basically, right? And eventually I was like, I think we're missing this point where we're not connecting to people enough. And when I actually landed a job just before Crisis Ally, okay, which was to become the head of resilience at a major, large organization, which was very new at the time. It was in 2017. 2017, head of resilience, right? And I was like, I think this is something to really dig into. And essentially, we left in good term with that team and with that company. And I said, you know what, let me go do my own thing, because I think this is the right time. Um, yeah, so this is when I started basically talking around and said, okay, I'd like to focus on resilience more than anything, and start preaching this around other organizations. And that's how we started this journey, basically. At the beginning, it was not called Crisis Ally. It was Alexandra Hoffmann Consulting, because it takes time to come up with a name, right? And essentially, COVID really helped turning everything and putting everything in the right place. I would say all the stars aligned, because this is when this topic became really big, really interesting for organizations, private, public, it doesn't matter, right? Now everyone is talking about this. So that's when I renamed it, not after myself, but to make it more like a wide brand, because it's not about me. It's about helping those organizations and making sure that those organizations are seeing those sometimes really bad events as ally as well, to do and to do things differently and to learn things to grow stronger. That's really what's at the heart of this name, basically, is we try to be the ally of the clients we work with. But the other thing is we want people to consider that those sometimes really nasty events can be allies in the long run, in the way that they change us, but hopefully for the better.
My goodness, I just completely agree with you on. I mean, I agree on so much of it, but that last point. This is why we sort of don't talk about this idea of travel optimization rather than travel risk, because when we think about risk, we kind of just go straight to the negatives, or we go straight to high risk destinations, high risk activities, and again, we kind of go to this tick box exercise that we've kind of got stuff in place without hardly ever experiencing these situations in person, so to kind of actually know whether or not these things, actually work or not. So I think the thing that we've got to kind of get our heads around, and this is a question that I get asked all the time, is people are sort of saying, well, what happens? How many times do people go to court, and how many times do kind of companies get taken to one side for this sort of stuff? And I'm like, I think we're kind of missing the point. There's events happening on a daily basis to people. It's about looking after your people. That's the legal piece, right? It's your duty of care obligation. And in some countries further than that, obviously in the UK, we've got even stricter laws on certain things, with regards to sort of corporate manslaughter acts and things. But it's not about, has anyone else got caught? Has anyone else got fined? It's, has stuff happened to companies before? And yes, it has, right? It's happening all the time. And we're living in a world now, and you and I talk about this all the time, that it's not just a risk of a sort of a terrorist attack or some other sort of situation like that. We're living in a climate crisis, so we're having adverse weather conditions affecting everything. Travel's being affected on a daily basis because of COVID, because we don't have the infrastructure and the volume of travel that we had once. So it's difficult to, and then we don't have the staff to look after it. So even if they say it's going, it's not going. You're guaranteed to be disrupted right now. It's not a thing that may happen. It's likely to happen. And all of these little things then have a knock-on effect to the person doing the trip. So it's not just the big stuff; it's the little stuff as well. But it's all got to be formed around the people, right? And that's, I think, what we've been missing. 100%. And it's just, that's what I think. That's what I love about what you do, is that you're bringing it back to that, and that's why I'm so excited to do what we're going to be doing together, which I can't talk about, but I really want to. So I obviously, following your career, so where you kind of got to where this missing point and this kind of idea that you've been, and I recognize that so much in what I'm doing now too. Well, from a sort of personal side, when did Alex decide she was gonna, the security was for her? Where was the sort of, what happened there? Because it's not a normal job for us girls. It's not, and I don't want to be sexist about this, but again, certainly, we're a little older. We're not in our 20s. We look gorgeous. We know that. But it is a very masculine orientated world still, isn't it? So, what happened? How?
What went wrong?
No, what went right? I love it. Come on, it's great. What went right? Goodness.
No. It's always been with me. If I go back really, really far, when I was a teenager, I wanted to be a police officer. So it's always been with me. I don't have any police officer in my family, so it was just, it's just what I wanted to do and be. And essentially, I started traveling, like I said at the beginning of our conversation, and I traveled for my studies. And I also had my first encounters with the professional world abroad, i.e., in Hong Kong. And this is when I was like, I want to stick with protecting people, but in an environment which allows me to travel around the world and meet new people and new cultures and new everyone all the time. This is when I met corporate security, basically. And I went to New York to study corporate security at the time, because there was nothing like this in France. That was back in 2000, like I said, just after 9/11. Yeah, 2001. So I arrived in New York after 9/11 to study corporate security. And that's when everything started for me in my career. So yeah, it's always been with me to make sure that that's also why I've never followed those. I know they're important. Okay, don't get me wrong. I don't want people to start quoting saying that I said that compliance is not an important thing, that insurance don't mean anything. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying that what drives me are the people, nothing else.
100%. And
Yeah.
I just completely recognize that. And I think, from where where I've come from, and I've seen how all the bits don't fit together, but we sell it in a certain way as if it does. It just drives me crazy, because ultimately the person at the end of that trip, that I say it all the time on my podcast, that line on that spreadsheet that you're just moaning about because it's an invoice you've got to allocate, that was a lived experience by somebody, and that can be a good experience, hopefully, but it could also be a negative experience based on the decisions around how prepared they are for the trip, how much you're willing to spend on them on that trip, the value of the trip to you, and what all that means. And for me, the frustration is that we've lost that bit of care. We lost it a long time ago, and travel just became an expense and a cost to control. And once it becomes a cost to control, you've lost the kind of point of what it's there for at all. And I think that's why when I started hearing about this other side of it, this new standard that was coming out that was really putting a backbone into what the travel industry should be doing, I really grabbed hold of it, because I was just like, this is about people. This has got nothing to do with measuring on spend. So, as a TMC, you go in and the first question you ask is, how much do you spend? It's
Yeah.
not, literally and it's not, and maybe that's changing now, but certainly that's not what that's not what this is about. And then you decide, well, how much air have you got? How much money am I going to make out of you? And but we don't sell it like that. We sell it as duty of care, and it's really kind of twisted the minds of the organizations, because they're expecting one thing and they're getting something else. And that's what drives me, is to kind of just, it's not to blow up the travel industry. It's just to make the travel industry more responsible and safer for people, because ultimately they're the ones that are not getting a hotel room because something's gone wrong with the technology piece. And now you've got a woman stranded in a lone city at night with no travel agent because they're a consultant and no one to talk to. Like, that's crazy. Like, that just shouldn't be happening nowadays, and it's wrong. So I just love that it's the drive of the people for you too.
If
Um,
I may, Bex, going back to the
mm,
reputational impact,
mm,
when I go back in my past, we should not neglect the fact that when we do actually focus on people and we take care of them really well, like meaning to take care of them, when they're facing those situations while traveling or even outside travel, right? Even at home. But let's say we focus on travel security right now, okay? Right, while traveling, because when things happens when we travel, it's even harder because we are away from home, we are away from our families and from our friends, and it's 10 times, depending on what happens, it can even be bigger than that, 10 times worse than when it happens at home. When we do take care of those people the right way, meaningful way, they thank us. I've actually had thank yous many times. They thank us. What do you think they say? They talk about the company in good terms
of
around
course
them.
they do.
The
Yeah,
company I'm working for, oh yes, they're taking care of us. This happened to
100%.
me, and the team took care of us. So this is such a great company to work for. So I'm not focusing on courts and fines or jail sentences or whatever it is. I'm focusing on people just thanking the organization they're working for because we took care of them.
And it's such a simple thing, isn't it, in theory? But
Yeah.
in reality, we just kind of say, call this number, and we don't think about all those other kind of bits that fit together in it, which is why I guess I love travel risk management, because it is this kind of framework for us to have those wider conversations and draw all those companies, all the different departments in those different stakeholders. Going back to your coming out of our silos, yes, everyone has a responsibility within their business, and when a piece of information or something happens and something comes in, but it's then how you bring all that together, disperse it, and bring it back together again, right, to ensure that the person being focused on is your traveler, your employee, your guest. And also often, you sort of, even the stuff you're putting in place for their employees, they can kind of just to get their heads around that. But what about their guests? What about their contractors? What about their consultants? So I always kind of echo, and our mutual friend Bruce, this idea that this is people risk management. And
Yeah.
I smiled when you said anything that can happen, and it can be exasperated, because in one of my courses I literally have a slide which says anything that can happen to a person can happen when they're traveling. The issue is it will be worse because there's no support network
Of course.
and they don't know where they are, right? Or
And it's
whatever the
scary
issue.
because you may not speak the local language, even if we speak English. It's just that's how it is. Being injured or being in a bad situation when you're not home is much more scary.
And you hear horror stories, so all of this
Oh, yeah.
stuff flies through your head, doesn't it? And I guess the more remote the destination or the more unknown the destination. But again, this sort of thing that I sort of pull back on. You and I are well traveled, and we were really fortunate enough to do that in our sort of late teens, 20s, and so on. It's not actually as easy for that to happen so much anymore. It sounds
Yeah,
crazy because obviously we have hybrid working and people doing stuff, but it's a different time
yeah,
for that now. So therefore, and I think I really feel that we have a responsibility to protect our younger generations that are coming through to say, the world isn't quite as you think it is. Yes, there is this world that we don't necessarily understand because you've got this kind of online thing happening and this meta universe, but actually the real world over here, there's some
mm,
stuff that you need to know about that, and it isn't like this. So we have this kind of responsibility because we remember stuff that we kind of did I went traveling pre-internet, for goodness sake. I'm a real old person. How on earth did we do it? But it's trying to kind of say, there is a way, and there's stuff that you need to know about, and there's stuff that you need to be prepared. So it's making sure, I think, and this is why the work you do just kind of resounds home with that, because you're allowing people to have these experiences. It's as much as to where does your responsibility lie as the organization, and at what point does the traveler or the employee's responsibility kick in, and
yeah.
really understanding what those responsibilities are, which I think is quite challenging for organizations who are dealing with different age groups and different experiences. So they have to sort of set a bar, right? As to, this is our responsibility, this is yours, but we will train you so you feel competent to actually handle these sort of situations.
I want to let me share a story, if you allow me,
I'd love you
Bex.
to.
Um, so some years ago, I need to make it as anonymous as possible, but some years ago, one morning I'm at home and I'm watching the news. And I'm basically a regional security manager, so I'm responsible for Western Europe at the time. And I'm watching the news, and I see that person being held hostage in some part of the world. And I'm like, okay, something hits me in the gut, because that was not the first time on the news. But I was like, okay, something's hit me. And I think like half an hour later, I get a call from one of the countries I was responsible for, from someone telling me, the person you just saw on the news is one of our employees. And I'm like, okay, so how, did he go for business? Did he go for personal travel? He had been there for personal, so it was meant to be a vacation. Okay.
Wow.
And what do we do? What do we do from there?
Hmm.
Bex, I kid you not, I've had multiple stakeholders, not inside the organization I was working for at the time, thank God, but outside the organization, asking me, why do you care? He went there on vacation.
Wow. Yeah. I'm not surprised. I'm sad to
Even
hear
10
it, but
years,
I'm,
even 10 years, or yeah, 10 years or so later, and still,
yeah,
angry at those
yeah,
stupid questions, right?
yeah. Of
So
course.
of course, because the organization I was working for were smart people, we obviously did everything we could to help with the situation, and essentially the person got released after many weeks, and everything was as fine as possible, basically, right? But the
Yeah.
point is, going back to where does the responsibility lies? What do you mean? I mean, and was it in our playbook of travel security to have someone being taken hostage during a vacation break? Of course not. It wasn't, right? So, but we did take care of it because there's no other way around it. It was never a question in our head, to even for the CEO of the company. To be honest with you, it was never a question, never. So
And it shouldn't be, right? And this is the thing. This it's such a powerful story because it's exactly what you hear all the time. This conversation around, but I use the term pleasure. I hate it, right? This business leisure holiday thing. We've just got to understand that going back to the fact that we were fortunate enough to travel. Traveling was a bit different 20 or 25 years ago. If people have got the opportunity to travel, that's why they work for certain companies. Like, just get that. Let's know that.
yeah.
That's why you take certain jobs, because you want to travel. Why wouldn't you extend it when flights are expensive? Why wouldn't you do that? So, and isn't it in the organisation's interest to look after their staff, whether they're on holiday or not? Because ultimately, then they can come back quicker and safer and get back to work, right? If we're going to be cutthroat about it, surely you want them back safe and healthy and working again and
Of
efficient,
course,
right?
of
So,
course.
but yeah, there's this kind of conversation around where you can't. Our travelers don't want you to interrupt with their leisure time, and I'm like, no, absolutely, they want their privacy. But I'm telling you now, with the right framework around it and the right conversation, they will opt in and opt out of a security
Mhm.
program very comfortably. I know numerous women that would. I know numerous other what we would call vulnerable travelers in certain countries, depending on their sexuality or depending on their race or whatever. They would. They would. It's just certain people that wouldn't, and that's fine. But give people the option to be able to do it and explain that it's there for their protection, nothing else. Um,
Trust me. I mean, I have another story that I can share, which is
mm,
still a big deal for the person that was impacted. But statistically, which is more likely to happen than a hostage situation. That's why
mhm,
I don't want to say something is worse than the other, because it's not the point. Um, but another story I wanted to share about travel security is that person one day who calls us and said, um, I before the trip, I had a surgery because of a cancer situation, and now apparently the surgery, I mean the scar or something was going wrong. What do we do?
okay.
What do we do? So we don't want to interfere in people's life, but trust me, when they need us, they are super happy to find us and to find
Yeah,
an ear to listen and to get some help for them, right? Which is pretty much
100%.
what we do this for, right? Um, at least that's what drives me. Basically, it's just if we're only here to prepare, but we're not here when shit hits the fan, what's the point?
You can have that. Honestly, sorry, I'm just terrible. I'm the daughter
Excuse
of
my
a
French.
mechanic.
Excuse my French.
You can get away with it. I'm just born in the gutter, unfortunately. I don't sound like I am, but I was. Um, no, this is it exactly. What is the point if we're going to hide behind stuff and not actually get stuff done and not actually?
No.
And ah, this is what I love about the people that are driving forward change and trying to do things and trying to move things forward. And I really believe there is a movement of people. I've met
Yeah.
people on one side who have been working in this industry for a long, long time and feel quite jaded by it because it is exhausting when companies are
Yeah.
just like, we don't have the budget, we're not prioritizing that. And then you've got this other kind of area of people who are like, it doesn't matter. We're just going to keep doing it anyway because you will need us and we know you're going to need us. And as this industry grows, which it's doing, and as these standards change and the certification is wanted by the travelers, ultimately, they're driving this more than anybody else. That's what's so cool about this whole thing.
Mm.
Um, we need to be there to ensure that they've got the stuff that they need because they don't know how to do it by themselves. So with that in mind, I can't believe we've already got to half an hour. I knew it would go really quickly. But let's, for those of our listeners who tune in to just get our top tips, what what are your top tips that you would want to give away to kind of, well, however you want to take that. So over to you.
So going back to what I was saying before, I would say the number one is to focus on the people, right? And to mean it. To do this in a meaningful way. It's not something like we write it in a policy. Okay, we'll focus on the people. No, it's about connecting heart to heart. Someone is calling us, is in trouble, and needs us for whatever reason. Okay, okay, what can I do to help that person? It's not, of course, there are policies, there are guidelines to follow, right? People to report to explain what we do. No questions about that. Okay. It's not about someone doing his own thing in its own corner. I'm not talking about this. I'm just saying it's about connecting to people and making sure that we're doing this for the right reasons. I just want to wrap up with what you said before on that point, and connect it to what you just said before, Bex. Roughly, I would say that 60% in my 25 years of professional experience in that world, okay, in that security environment, a good 60% of my experience in around crisis management was due, including the biggest and the worst ones, was in a travel security context. I would say it's a good 60%. So it's about the people. There's no doubt about that. Number two, I want to say I always say this one, but have the courage and humility to say when we don't know, right? So going back to that first story I was sharing about the hostage situation, which was actually done by terrorists. That's why I thought about that. It's about having the courage and humility to say, okay, I don't quite know right now how to deal with this. Let me ask questions around. Let's gather and see how to deal with this situation. I said this. My director at the time said that at the time. And this was, to me, a huge testament to his courage and humility to then go strong on the situation onward, basically, right? And yeah, that's pretty much it. And making sure because like you said also during in the past few minutes, Bex, you said at some point it's about making sure that we connect the right people, right? And that's what it is. Also, it's true that in travel security, when we travel, from experience I can tell that things happens unexpectedly, but really unexpectedly. I guess it's because we're away from home, and things multiply. I don't know. It's just crazy. And all of a sudden you need to be connected to a whole bunch of people when you have to deal with the situation. So being able to have that level of emotional intelligence to connect with all the stakeholders, but to connect with empathy. Trust me, some stakeholders will freeze in facing certain situations, which is okay. We're human beings, right? Others won't freeze, so might take over a little more, right? So it's having that emotional intelligence to interact with the stakeholders and do this again in a human way. It's not always about the policies and the guidelines. I know some people I think I'm crazy when I say this, but I'm not. Seriously, I'm saying this from experience, basically. I'm saying this from experience.
I'm smiling and nodding. Yeah, I mean, literally all the way through that, I was going, empathy. It's empathy, isn't it? It's literally being able to put yourself into the position of the person that's experiencing it with
Yeah.
no judgment, with nothing apart from, I'm going to help you because you called me for help.
Yeah.
Not because you're responsible, not for any other reason, but that's the right thing to do and the human thing to do in that moment. And being and yeah, I mean, having the humility to obviously say you don't know is essential. I mean, but we all know and experience people that can't do that, and obviously that can make the situation
So
so
many,
much
so many,
worse.
Bex. Let's not kid ourselves. So many.
So much worse. But I think those that can do that, again, no one's expecting anyone to be able to deal with all of these situations. I once had a boss who sort of made some flippant comment after the pandemic and said, well, even with all the risk resilience in the world, we'd have never planned for that. And I was just like, okay, maybe not, but at least we'd have had some stuff in place just generally. So there's a real kind of you're going to always get people who just kind of run by the seat of their pants and get on with this sort of stuff, but that's relying on a whole lot of people to really help when stuff goes wrong, and maybe not being able to help yourself. If you actually have the team around you that you can talk to and everyone's as prepared as they can be, and then you've got the ability to actually work together and communicate, and know how to do that, and sort of and know how to do that under a crisis, then we're in a whole different situation, aren't we? And that's exactly what you guys are doing at Crisis Ally, and that's why I love you, even though we have to stop this conversation. So thank you so much for joining us today, and we'll look forward to seeing you in March. That's all we'll say. For those of you that are joining us, you get to see Alex and I in person together in a room, which is very exciting. But yeah, if there's anything else you want to say before I close off today, Alex, thank you so much for joining us.
No, I want to thank you, Bex. I love the conversation. I think it led to so many paths, such interesting path. We could keep on going for forever, right? And I'm really looking forward to the event in March. I'm 100% confident that it's going to be a huge success. So thank you for having me today, and thank you for having me in March, and thank you for the podcast.
Well, no, thank you for everything that you're doing. Thank you for Crisis Ally. Thank you for being so passionate, and thank you for making this about the people, because that is exactly what this is about. So, to our wonderful listeners, you have been listening to another episode of Talking TRM, the podcast dedicated to travel risk management. My name is Bex Deadman, also known as Travel Risk Bex. We've been joined today by Alexandra Hoffmann from Crisis Ally. We will see you soon in a couple of weeks. In the meantime, please stay safe. Take care. Goodbye.